No one warned me that there is a kind of regret that doesn't come to destroy you, but to stay with you every day. I am 76 years old. I have just left a marriage that lasted more than 50 years. Just saying that much, I know your mind has already reached a conclusion. Too late. Should have tried harder. At this age, what can you possibly change? I thought the same way. For many years, I believed the heaviest part would be the decision to leave, the rupture, the loneliness afterward. I prepared myself for tears, for long nights, for a sense of loss I wouldn't be able to name. I imagined it would be loud, dramatic, clearly defined. But when it actually happened, what stayed with me was nothing like what people usually describe. It wasn't noisy. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment of collapse. It simply repeated itself steadily in very ordinary days. Just 2 words. Too late. Not the kind of too late everything is over, but the kind of too late. And now you still have to live with the fact that you waited too long. And that was when I began to realize something even harder to accept. Perhaps the problem wasn't that I left the marriage. Perhaps the problem was that I stayed far too long in a relationship I called fine, proper, worth keeping, while it was no longer a place where I was truly present. People talk a lot about marriage as something that must be protected at all costs. Very few talk about how sometimes what exhausts you isn't leaving, but staying long enough to forget what you started losing in the first place. And to understand why this feeling of too late follows me, even now, I had to return to the question I avoided for decades. Why did I stay for so long? I'm not angry. It's just, I don't feel like I'm here anymore. That was the last thing my wife said to me before she turned and walked into the bedroom, closing the door very gently. There was no argument, no tears, no accusations. And precisely because it was so gentle, I didn't stand up. I stayed in my chair, looking at the half-finished dinner on the table, telling myself everything would be fine. She said that after we had been together for more than 30 years. At the time, I thought it was just a moment of fatigue, a sentence spoken from weakness. I didn't realize I had just heard a goodbye that was spoken long before the leaving actually happened. From the outside, our marriage was not wrong. We married young, built a life together, got through the busiest years side by side. No betrayal, no violence, no single act bad enough to be condemned. We ate dinner at the same time, went to familiar places on weekends, took one photo together every holiday season. And because of that, I stayed. I stayed through year 20, then year 30. I told myself this was marriage, that emotions aren't always necessary, that stability is a form of happiness. There were very clear moments I chose to ignore. The year my wife suggested moving closer to the place she wanted to live, I said it wasn't necessary. The year she wanted to take time off work to study something she had dreamed of when she was young, I said maybe later. The year she asked me whether I still felt like we were a team, I laughed it off and told her not to think so much. I didn't yell. I didn't forbid anything. I just postponed. And I postponed very well. I thought I was a good husband because I didn't cause trouble. I didn't hurt anyone, but I also wasn't really there. Gradually, my wife stopped asking for my opinion, not because she didn't need it, but because she had grown used to not receiving a real answer. I did the same. I grew used to keeping my thoughts to myself, I called it maturity, being reasonable, not making things complicated. There was one very specific evening about 10 years ago when we sat next to each other watching television. No one spoke. I remember the feeling clearly. Not sad, not angry, just empty. I thought to myself, this is probably how it is when people have been together a long time. And I stayed. When our children left home, I thought things would change, that we would find each other again. But the truth was that once the noise of responsibility disappeared, the emptiness became clearer. Long mornings, evenings without plans. And in those quiet spaces, I began to see what I had never dared to look at before. We didn't argue because there was nothing left to argue about. We didn't talk deeply because we were used to not being heard. I was still there, still fulfilling my role, but inside, I was disappearing more and more. What embarrasses me now is that I knew it. I just didn't want to face it. I stayed not because of some noble sense of duty, but because it was easier. Easier than starting over. Easier than admitting I had let things drift too far. I was afraid of my age. Afraid of how others would look at me. Afraid of waking up in the morning without knowing what the day would look like. And I wrapped all of those fears in a word that sounded respectable: stability. Until the day my wife said that sentence softly, calmly, like someone who had already said it to herself too many times. And when she left, I realized she didn't leave me that day. She had been leaving little by little every time I chose silence, every time I chose the least complicated option, every time I convinced myself I didn't need to change. I wasn't abandoned in a wrong marriage. I was left behind in a marriage that was no longer right enough for me to live fully inside it. And standing alone in the house afterward, I understood that what hurt most wasn't that she left, but that I had stayed so long in a life where I had slowly disappeared without noticing. After my wife left, I began to see the evidence I had deliberately avoided for years. The house was quieter, not because voices were missing, but because no one was trying to be heard anymore. The cups were still in their usual places, but without the trace of waiting. The calendar still hung on the wall, but empty in a different way, not because there was nothing to do, but because no one needed me to remember anything for them. And in those small details, I could no longer blame circumstances, time, or differences between two people. I had to look directly at myself. I realized I didn't lose my wife on the day she walked out the door. I lost her gradually over many years, each time I chose silence over listening, safety over honesty, physical presence while emotionally withdrawing completely. I wasn't left behind. I had left first. I just stayed in body. And this is the hardest thing to admit. I was not a victim of delay. I cultivated it. I told myself I was doing the right thing, that maintaining stability was maturity, that not speaking was a way to avoid hurting each other. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid to face things. Afraid to change. Afraid to admit the relationship needed more than I was willing to give. I once believed love meant staying, not leaving, enduring when things faded. But looking at what remained after my wife left, I understand now that wasn't love. Love, if it is real, does not require someone to shrink themselves to keep the peace. It does not ask you to disappear so the relationship can continue. Love is not living under the same roof for years while no longer being present in each other's lives. Love is presence being seen, being asked about, being allowed to be yourself without apologizing for it. I confuse love with habit for far too long, commitment with fear of change. And the price of that confusion was not just a late separation, but the feeling of too late that follows me every day now, not to punish me, but to remind me that the deepest pain was not losing my wife, but realizing I never truly lived inside that marriage. And once I admit that the story no longer ends with where I went wrong, it opens another question for anyone listening. If love is not staying at all costs, then what is really keeping you where you are right now? Life after that did not become easy. I still have very long evenings. There are days when I cook for one person and suddenly realize I'm cooking out a habit for two. But one thing has clearly changed. I no longer have to pretend. I no longer have to play the role of someone who is fine in a life that only looks fine. I learned that love is not enduring until both people are exhausted. Love, if it is real, must allow both people to exist fully without shrinking themselves to preserve a familiar structure. It took me many years to understand this, and the cost of that delay was not leaving, but the years I stayed without being present. If I can share one lesson, it is this: don't wait until everything collapses to ask yourself whether you are happy. Don't wait until silence becomes the main language in your relationship. Examine your life earlier with very simple questions. Can you still be yourself? Are you still being heard? And most importantly, do you still dare to speak honestly about how you feel? The answer is not always leaving. Sometimes it is real conversation. Sometimes it is setting boundaries. And sometimes it is accepting that staying out of fear is never a healthy choice. If you're listening to these words and something in them touches you, I want you to do one small thing, just one. Name the biggest fear that is keeping you still. Write it down or say it quietly to yourself. Because the moment you name your fear correctly, you begin taking back your right to choose your life.